In a world where grief is supposed to look a very specific way, where not crying at a funeral marks you as emotionally stunted or secretly cruel, there's a huge group of people who attend funerals and feel absolutely nothing like sadness. Not because they're psychopaths and not because they didn't care about the person who died, but because their emotional system processes loss and mourning in a way that doesn't produce the visible grief that society demands as proof of humanity. They stand there watching others sob and embrace, and they feel strangely detached, almost like they're watching a performance they can't authentically join. And then they feel guilty and ashamed, wondering if something is fundamentally broken inside them. If you're watching this right now, you're either one of these people feeling desperately relieved that you're not alone, or you someone who grieves deeply and visibly and just can't comprehend how anyone could stand dry-eyed at a funeral for someone they cared about. But here, as the raw truth nobody wants to say. Individuals who don't feel sad at funerals aren't emotionally deficient or lacking in empathy. They represent specific psychological and neurological profiles that reveal how certain minds process death, attachment, and what grief actually looks like when it doesn't conform to cultural scripts. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will completely transform how you understand grief, emotional authenticity, and the dangerous assumption that there's only one correct way to mourn. You might even discover uncomfortable truths about how much of what we call grief is genuine feeling versus a performance we've learned is socially required. Let me ask you something that might feel almost sacrilegious. How much of the crying and visible sadness at funerals is authentic, spontaneous grief versus a learned performance of what mourning is supposed to look like? When you see someone sobbing, can you honestly distinguish between genuine sadness and the performance of grief they then taught is the only acceptable response? And more importantly, if you're someone who doesn't naturally feel sad at funerals, have you ever considered that your response might not be a deficiency, but simply a different, equally valid way of processing loss? To understand this, we first need to recognize the enormous cultural pressure around how we're supposed to grieve. Funerals aren't just gatherings. They're highly ritualized emotional performances with very specific scripts. From childhood, we're taught that sadness is the only appropriate response to death. Loving someone means crying when they die. Visible grief proves the depth of your connection. This creates what we might call an emotional prescription. If you're not visibly sad, not crying, not demonstrably distraught, then you either didn't care enough, you're in denial, or you're emotionally damaged. The possibility that you might be processing loss in a different but equally valid way isn't even considered. Society has decided that sadness equals love and tears equal caring. But here, as the raw truth that makes people deeply uncomfortable, emotional responses to death are far more diverse than our cultural scripts acknowledge. For a large portion of the population, sadness simply isn't what they feel when someone dies. This isn't about being broken. It's about having different neurological wiring, different attachment styles, or different philosophies about death. This diversity emerges from 5 distinct psychological and neurological traits. First, delayed or non-linear grief processing. For many people, the full emotional impact of a death doesn't hit during the funeral. The funeral itself can feel surreal, disconnected, like they're moving through a fog where the reality of the loss hasn't fully penetrated. This isn't denial. It's how some nervous systems naturally buffer overwhelming experiences. For these individuals, the genuine grief, the deep sadness, all of that comes later. Maybe days, weeks, or even months afterward, when something unexpectedly triggers the full realization that the person is gone. But during the funeral, they feel oddly numb or calm, which creates profound confusion and shame. Grief psychology shows that delayed grief is a completely normal variation in how humans process loss. Second, relief, peace, or complex emotions overshadowing sadness. Sometimes the dominant feeling at a funeral isn't sadness but relief, especially when the deceased suffered through a long illness or decline. Watching someone you love deteriorate is its own form of grief, and their death can feel like a release from suffering for both them and you. Sometimes the feeling is genuine peace, especially if you hold beliefs that death is a natural transition rather than a tragedy. But society demands sadness above all else, making these other genuine feelings seem wrong. You can love someone deeply and still feel primarily relief when their suffering ends. These emotions aren't less valid than sadness. They're just less socially acceptable. Third, intellectual processing over emotional response. Some people have a cognitive style that engages intellectually with death rather than emotionally. Their first response is to think about it, not feel it. They process the philosophical implications, contemplate mortality, and reflect on the person's life and impact. This intellectual engagement is their authentic response, not a defense mechanism hiding emotions. They're processing the loss through their analytical mind, and this is valid grief work, even though it doesn't look like conventional mourning. People genuinely differ in whether they're emotion-first or cognition-first processors, and neither style indicates a greater or lesser capacity for deep feeling. Fourth, secure attachment and comfort with impermanence. People with a secure attachment style can love deeply while also accepting that all things, including relationships, are temporary. They value connections, but the loss of those connections doesn't threaten their fundamental sense of self. Additionally, some people have developed a genuine acceptance of death as a natural part of existence. They've integrated the truth of mortality into their worldview, so death feels less like a tragedy and more like a natural conclusion. When someone dies, especially after a long, full life, these individuals might feel acceptance rather than devastation. This isn't cold detachment. It's a mature understanding that allows for genuine appreciation of what was without desperate clinging. And fifth, different love languages and expression styles. Some people express love and connection through actions, practical support, or quality time rather than emotional displays. Their love for the deceased was shown through how they showed up in life, the time they spent together, the ways they supported them. Their grief and honoring of that connection comes through different channels than crying. They might express their love by helping with arrangements, supporting other mourners, or sharing stories that celebrate the person's life. None of these expressions require visible sadness, yet they're equally valid demonstrations of care. Forcing these individuals to produce tears as proof of love is asking them to be inauthentic. When you combine these traits: delayed processing, complex emotions, intellectual processing, secure attachment, and different love languages, you get psychological profiles where not feeling sad at funerals isn't a deficiency but a natural variation. Here's what society desperately doesn't want to acknowledge. There is no universal, correct way to grieve. The cultural insistence that sadness is the only legitimate response is a tyrannical prescription that invalidates the diversity in how people actually experience loss. And here's the truly raw truth. Much of what we see as grief at funerals is performed emotion. People cry because they're supposed to cry, because not crying raises questions. The people who don't feel sad at funerals aren't less genuine. They're often more authentic because they're refusing to perform emotions they don't actually feel. So what does this mean for you? If you grieve visibly and feel deep sadness at funerals, that's valid. But please understand that others' different responses don't indicate less love. Stop judging people who don't cry. And if you're someone who doesn't feel sad at funerals, I hope this provides profound relief. You are not broken. Your grief processing is different, not deficient. You don't owe anyone performed sadness. Your authentic response, whatever it is legitimate. The deeper truth is that grief is as individual as love itself. The real tragedy isn't in feeling or not feeling sad. It's in judging ourselves and others against narrow cultural scripts. Now I want to hear from you, and this requires vulnerability. Have you ever not felt sad at a funeral and felt ashamed? Or have you judged someone else for not crying? This is a judgment-free space for honest reflection. Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read every one. If this gave you permission to be authentic in your grief, hit that like button. It helps this reach others who are struggling. And if you want more raw truth about psychology that challenges cultural norms, subscribe and hit the bell. Remember, authentic emotion always trumps prescribed performance. Whether you grieve loudly or quietly, immediately or eventually, through tears or through silence, your response is valid. Honor your truth, not society's script. That's the only authentic mourning. Thank you for watching.